Hello everybody, this is Gregory with 5-Minute Catholic Apologetics, where 5 minutes of your time may get you to the divine. Today we're going to talk about how the church is a hospital for sinners, not a museum of saints. Now before we begin, let's start with a prayer. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritui Sancti. Amen. Gloria Patri Filio et Spiritui Sancto, secutor in principio et nunc et semper et seculi seculorum. Amen. So I want to do an episode on this. Oh, by the way, I'm recording this in Astoria, Oregon, which is at the mouth of the Columbia River. On the other side of the mouth of the Columbia River would be Washington State. So I'm where the Columbia River meets the Pacific Ocean. So just beautiful roses all around me and so forth. I want to do an episode on this because I think there's a certain segment of non-Christians who think there's this very pervasive hypocrisy in the Christian world. And no doubt there is. What is hypocrisy? Hypocrisy is condemning somebody's actions when you're actively doing those actions. So if you are condemning actions that you're no longer doing, that's not hypocrisy. You can look at St. Paul. St. Paul, of course, persecuted Christians. But after he converted, he's exhorting people to what? Don't quarrel, don't sin, don't slander, don't fornicate, all these things, because he himself is no longer doing it. But he's speaking from a purpose and of a worldview of no longer doing those things. So he's not a hypocrite. But a lot of Christians are hypocrites. You kind of see this in the televangelist world, and certainly with Catholic clerics or Catholic leading people in a parish. Like, oh, look at me, I'm a leading member of this church. And then you find out they're having affairs or they're embezzling money. And then I think a lot of non-Christians will look at these examples as you see, Christians are all hypocrites. They're all hypocrites. And they do this to kind of reinforce the idea that they shouldn't be Christians because all Christians are hypocrites. Well, let me tell you, there's atheist hypocrites, there's Hindu hypocrites, and so forth, because humanity is flawed. We have the sin of Adam and Eve, so we're all dealing with the sins of the flesh. The spirit's willing, but the flesh is weak. We're all dealing with these things. And you're going to have wheats and you're going to have weeds in every city, of every state, of every province, of every region, of every part of this world. You're going to find the good and the bad and the somewhere in between. And so we have this saying, the church is a hospital for sinners, not a museum of saints. And I think you can see this played out with the apostles. The apostles were severely flawed, as we've talked about here many times. And the church will always have sinners, because that's why Christ came, to establish the church for sinners. This is why he gave us the sacraments, in particular the sacrament of penance. He knew that we had the sins of the flesh, the attraction to earthly desires, concupiscence as they call it. And this is why he set up the sacrament of confession, and he expects us to use it over and over, because we're going to fall over and over. Yes, for every church father who, like St. Anthony of the Desert and all these types who lived such an ascetic life that they try to reach these higher, like, mystical levels where they were no longer sinning, for every one of those paragons of sainthood, most of us are just trying to eke out an existence, and we're battling sin all the time. And so we are flawed. And at many times in our life, we are hypocrites. And many times in our life, we are struggling with sins of the eyes, of lusting, or an inordinate appetite to food or to drink, and certainly the sins of detraction, the sins of gossip, the sins of pride, which is the cardinal sin of the 7 deadly sins. The idea, I'm better than everybody else. Oh, look at these people. Oh, look at me. I'm great, I'm great, I'm great. So we're always flawed. And so the church is there to help us, because we are flawed and we will sin and we will continue to sin. And the church is there to provide us like a refuge and succor and aid, namely through the sacrament of confession. And then once we're in a state of grace, we have the sacrament of the Eucharist to give us spiritual food. So confession is medicine for the soul, and the Eucharist is food for the soul. And so understand, like, if you don't go to church, this episode's for all Christians, all Protestants. and you don't go to church, and you kind of have this idea that everybody that goes to church thinks they're perfect. Well, certainly, like with anything, the wheats and the weeds, you're always going to find a certain segment of people who think that they're perfect. They want to sit in the front row of the church and think, look at me, I'm a leading member of this congregation, whether it be Protestant or Catholic. For every one of those, the large majority of Christians are just as flawed as atheists, and we're struggling just as much. And we need the church, and we need the graces that come from the sacrament to aid us to persevere to the end. Christ says we must persevere to the end, and he gave us these instruments and these tools to help us persevere in the end. So understand, the church is a hospital for sinners. We're all sinners, and if you don't think you're a sinner, my friends, you are deluded beyond deluded. We're not a museum of saints. It's a constant, daily struggle to fight the temptations that we have, the devil and the angel on each side. And luckily, Christ gave us tools to help us until the end of our earthly life. So please, any atheists that are listening and understand this, look, the Christians aren't hypocrites. We're no more hypocrites than anybody else. We are flawed creatures like everybody else, but we struggle and strive to be the best that we can. And we use the church founded by Jesus Christ with the sacraments that he gave us to aid us in this. Guys, post in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, take care. God bless and pray.